episode of the Wobcast 2.0. I'm your host, Mike Wobschall. Wobby with you along with my partner, per usual. It's Gyles, and we're excited to dig down deeper into the first half of the Vikings 2023 draft haul. We kind of went over the draft in general in our last episode, and we let you know that over the course of the next two episodes, we're going to drill down deeper into the draft picks that the Vikings came away with from last weekend. And so we're here to do the first three draft picks for the Vikings this year. Today, next week, it'll be the back half, the last three draft picks, which I actually came away from the draft feeling a little bit more excited about those last three picks than I did the first three, but maybe my mind will change a little bit after we drill down deeper with some data and some more opinions and insight from yours truly and from Gyles on the first three picks. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We might touch on a few things at the end of this episode before we wrap things up, but we want to keep our focus on the draft as the Vikings come away from the main tentpole event of the offseason with an offensive player with the 23rd pick. So we'll start with him, and then we'll get into a couple of defenders that the Vikings came away with in the draft as well. So to help me do that is going to be Gyles. We bring him in right now. Hey, Gyles, how you doing, man?
Hey, happy Monday. Best day of the week.
That's
really
right.
excited to chat through things today. Everyone that knows me knows that Monday is the best day of the week. Whether things are going good or things are going bad, it's a great reset time, which could honestly be a pretty heavy comparison to the NFL draft. Whether your team is doing well or it's not, it's a good time to reset and try to rehash things at different positions and try to improve. That's the way I look at Monday. So definitely excited to chat through the first three picks of the 2023 draft. I know there's some skepticism from some members of the media that some picks were better than others, but when you look at the upside of these first three players, I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, and let's start with the first one of them all, and that is the wide receiver Jordan Addison. Pick 23 for the Vikings. Now they should have been picking 24th, but they selected 23rd in the first round, not because they made a trade up, but because Miami had to forfeit their first round pick, and Miami was ahead of the Vikings. So the Vikings picked 23rd in the first round, and I'll let you get into. I'll let you start, Gyles, where you want to start when it comes to Addison, his background, his skill set, or his projection with the Vikings. But I want a little groundwork or context on this pick, and you can comment on that or not. I think the Vikings are rightfully excited and genuinely excited about Addison. I think if Kevin O'Connell didn't think he was a great fit in this offense, I think he would have been okay selecting a player at a different position. So I don't think that there's any reason to throw water onto the fire of the Jordan Addison pick at all. However, I will say, we talked about this, I don't know that he was like their first selection, like their first choice for pick number 23. And I truly don't know if he was their first choice among the wide receivers. And I might be wrong on that, and we'll never know unless Kwesi lets us into the draft room and shows us the draft board, right? We'll never know that. But the reason I say that is what we talked about earlier. They used up almost all of their time, right? Which indicates to you that they may have been trying to trade out of it.
Yep.
And we talked last week. We hearkened it back to the draft where Laquan Treadwell was selected, which I believe was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. We talked about this, where it was like there were three wide receivers taken right in a row. The Vikings got the third of the bunch. It was Doxson who went. Who was the other? Will Fuller who went. It was Will Fuller, Doxson, and then Treadwell. So you wondered if the Vikings had stacked theirs and Treadwell wasn't their top one, and they just had to take who was left. So and we don't know if that happened here for the Vikings, but there were three. Like Addison was the fourth in a row, so three receivers went off the board before Addison. Now I would be fairly certain in guessing that they would have had Zay Flowers ahead of Addison.
Yep.
And Gyles, you were really high on Zay Flowers.
Yep.
Now the others who went in front of Addison, you could convince me that the Vikings liked Addison more than the other two. You cannot convince me that they liked him more than Addison. Only Kwesi and O'Connell can do that. And
Correct.
They'll never take the time to do that. So long story short, they get Addison. I think they're excited about him. I think they would have rather had Flowers, but he went 3 picks in front of him. They got Addison for a lot of reasons. I think they liked him. I think he's a good fit. He's got a lot in his background, and I'll be curious to see what your projections are for him with the Vikings, as well as some of your opinions on his background. So from there, I'll let you kind of steer the ship.
Yeah, 100%. So when I think about this past offseason, we've added Josh Oliver, who's one of the best, if not the best, blocking tight ends in the league. We re-signed CJ Ham, who is kind of a pseudo running back, fullback, kind of tight end person. So all signs point to the fact that they're trying to beef up and maybe run more 49ers style offense than maybe the Rams style offense. That's me making a few assumptions there, but those indications make me think that we're going that direction. So that's why I was maybe a little bit more higher on Zay Flowers, because he's more of a Deebo Samuel guy that can be a little bit beefier in all aspects of the game.
Agreed.
With that being said, if you weren't going to pick Zay Flowers, whether he wasn't on the board or you didn't want to pick him, Jordan Addison was my next best pick for a lot of reasons, including the fact that he is more of a Adam Thielen 2.0, and the idea that he's a great route runner. He's a freak physically. I mean, he really, really understands things. And I think before I get into the real nuts and bolts of what he brings to the table, I think a couple of things can be true, that he may not have necessarily been the number one wide receiver on their board holistically, but that he was the pick that Kevin O'Connell wanted at 23. Now, the reason that I think they took the entire time at the draft is I think Kwesi wanted to see if he could get a haul back by trading back, but that Kevin O'Connell wanted to pick Addison. Even if you analyze, this is me psychoanalyzing here, but if you look at the tape that the Vikings released post-draft, Kevin O'Connell was saying that he's like, this is the best player on the board. He's a day one starter. He kind of said it in a little bit of a tensious tone, in my opinion, or it made me wonder, did they record that mid selection where they hadn't selected him and he was pushing for us to pick Jordan Addison, but that Kwesi was like, well, let's see if we can get a haul back and maybe we'll trade back and still try to get him. But Kevin O'Connell was like, no, let's pick this guy. He's a day one starter. And that those were maybe in disagreements. Those two were in disagreement. So then once they were able to actually select Jordan Addison, both of them were saying, hey, we stuck to the plan. We stuck to the plans. That made me wonder if those two were in disagreement for a little bit. But at the end of the day, we did pick Jordan Addison, which I think was a great thing. I know once again, some people disagree, but I think when you think about getting a day one starter, like Kevin O'Connell said, I think Jordan Addison definitely is that guy. Like I mentioned, he's a freak physical athlete. He has knowledge of both offense and defense from playing both sides of the ball in high school. So he went to Frederick, Maryland. Currently he's 21 years old. So he was born in 2002. He has 6 brothers, 3 sisters. This guy comes from a big family. The way I mentioned that is that I think he knows how to interact with people. Like he's a team player, so to speak. But in high school, he played 3 different positions. He played quarterback, wide receiver, and he was a defensive back. He was a 4-year starter, which maybe neither here nor there, but he's a 4-star recruit. He was the 10th best athlete going to the 2020 recruiting class. He was the 12th best prospect out of Maryland. And then he committed to Pitt early after high school graduation. So this guy, was 2020 season freshman. He was an All-American by the Athletics, the Rivals, in 247 Sports. He was an honorable mention for All ACC Rookie of the Year runner-up. He was the first Pitt wide receiver to achieve multiple 100-yard games since Tajay Boyd. This guy going into his sophomore year was the ACC championship winner, 6 catches, 117 yards, a touchdown. He was the Peach Bowl loser, unfortunately, but this guy put up over 1,500 yards, 18 touchdowns, 100 catches. He was 4th in the nation in receiving yards. This guy was doing some pretty interesting things. He was first team All-American, and they entered the transfer portal in May 3rd of 2022. It transferred to USC. And from there went on to achieve almost 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 59 catches. He chose not to play in the bowl game to prepare for the NFL Combine, and then was ultimately picked in round 1 from us. But when you think about all the different elements leading up to that, he really did some interesting things. Now I can get to kind of the different ways that he was used in all those different elements, especially at USC. But any thoughts thus far, kind of in his thought? Or in his progression?
I think he's a well-decorated player. I mean, he has absolutely demonstrated an ability to produce at every level he's been at, and I think any holes that you can poke in his resume or background, they're few and far between, but anything that you can cover it up with lots of other accolades or accomplishments. I think from a background and a past production standpoint, you can't be anything except excited. However, what excites me more than that, though, and I think you're going to get into this right now, is the usage and the versatility paired with a running mate in Justin Jefferson, who to me is also a versatile player that you can line up in different spots on the field. So, I mean, you look at we use PFF a lot here, and you can love it or hate it or be somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter, but at least it gives you a baseline. It gives you it grounds you somewhere. It gives you a jumping off point for a debate. And even if you're one who just completely disregards PFF, or you view them as a religion, the truth is somewhere in between, probably. Okay. So, his PFF grades were really good every year of his college career, but they were particularly good in 21 and 22. So he obviously demonstrates the ability to progressively improve and get better. And so I think his production was outstanding. From what I can see, he runs great routes, but from what I hear from people talking about him, he runs great routes. So I see him as a great fit. I can see why O'Connell likes him. I can see why they think he's a good running mate to Justin Jefferson. Of course, Adam Thielen leaving opens up that opportunity. I feel that KJ Osborne is someone who can be productive and someone who should not be overlooked. But I don't think KJ Osborne's ceiling is what Jordan Addison's ceiling is, or what obviously Justin Jefferson's is. And I think you are much better off if KJ Osborne is your 2B or your number 3 guy, as opposed to if he's your 2A. I think if he's your 2A, you're left wanting a little bit more. I think if he's your 3rd guy, I think he's one of the best 3rd guys you can have in the league. So, I look at Jordan Addison snaps by position in college, and obviously he's predominantly used out wide, but I see lots of stuff in the slot, enough in the slot that makes me think he can be used in the slot in the NFL. And if you can take a guy who's predominantly out wide, but get him to be good in the slot, you can probably get him to be good on the inside slot. You can probably line him up in the backfield. So I think you're going to get into this a little bit, Gyles, but what excites me more about his past production is the projection of what he could be and his versatility that Kevin O'Connell will be able to use with the Vikings.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, that directly references his 2021 season when he was in his last year with Pitt. He predominantly played in the slot there. He had 576 snaps in the slot and 256 out wide.
Wow,
now that's usage, right? So he was more of a slot receiver than a wide. It completely flipped when he went to USC. Now I would say he had similar PFF grades in both years, just in different ways. Essentially for USC in 2022, he played 102 snaps in the slot and then 422 snaps out wide. Both had phenomenal PFF grades. But when you analyze his 2021 performance in Pitt, not only did he play a lot of slot, he also was pretty phenomenal at run game. He had a 71.8 grade in the run blocking game. So it makes me really, really excited, especially when you pair that against Justin Jefferson. If you put Justin Jefferson out wide and then you put Jordan Addison in the slot, not only can he achieve success when being a slot receiver, but ultimately when you're running play action and doing a few other things in that regard, that he can still be an adequate run blocker, which I think will really, really give us a really high upside when it comes to being a team that is not being able to be predictable. So when you think about when he's on the field, if he's able to produce pretty good run blocking as well as be a good slot receiver, really, really excited about that. But obviously when you put him out wide, he's still achieved success. When you look at his sheer receiving production, in the short game, between 0 and 9 yards, he had an 89 grade PFF wise. So he did phenomenally. Now, when you start extending that into the medium and deep category, when it comes to receptions, medium being 10 yards to 19 yards and deep being 20 yards plus, he gets better. Literally, the farther out he goes, the better he gets. In deep passes, he achieved 370 yards. He had a 99.9 PFF grade. Like this guy had 92 yards after catch. Like this guy, if you can get him loose, this guy is phenomenal. So I'm really excited to see him paired against Justin Jefferson to really present some really deep threat games, because at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins is at least a top 5, if not better, deep threat when it comes to quarterback. So you're pairing tremendous accuracy with two really good deep threats. So I'm really excited about that. Now he had probably the biggest production in the medium game between 10 and 19 yards. Ultimately, he had 17 targets, 12 receptions. He had a touchdown, 58 yards after catch, and a 94.9 PFF grade. So really exciting from that standpoint. Now, when you talk to people about this guy, like when you think about, what is a negative to this guy, the only thing that people really can come up with is, will he have success with someone that is not an above average quarterback? So like when you look at Caleb Williams, he has a chance to be a pretty high draft pick next year.
Probably number 1 overall. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, minus something askew going on. He has a phenomenal quarterback throwing to him. So will he be able to be successful with a non-elite quarterback, which in some ways people say Kirk Cousins is? I think he's closer to that than Kirk Cousins is closer to Caleb Williams than being a complete train wreck, but that would be the one question mark around him. Now, I think Kirk presents some tremendous accuracy, so I don't project any issues with that. But that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest knocks against him, is that he's only played with great quarterbacks. But other than that, he's a complete natural. He's talked a lot about looking up to Stephon Diggs, being a product out of Maryland. Really excited about that. And he said because of Stephon Diggs, he switched from a defensive back to receiver and wanted to kind of follow his footsteps, so to speak, in route running. He got a scholarship from Notre Dame to play cornerback even. So like this guy is no slouch in a defensive back that, he couldn't make it as cornerbacks, he went to receiver. This guy understands both sides of the ball, which I think makes him an even better route runner, because he understands cornerback and can understand how to manipulate that, so to speak. He's talked a lot about being kind of an artist when it comes to route running, and he says he's going to go painting pictures. So I'm really excited to see this, because he reminds me a lot of Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson in terms of their attitude. They come to the game as a complete professional, so to speak. Like, I take this very seriously. I'm not out here to have fun. I want to win, and I'm being aggressive about this. So I'm really excited about that attitude that comes to the field.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say, Gyles, the other thing that I don't love is his size and frame.
Fair enough.
He's 5'11", 174. So if anything, that to me is a bigger potential chink in the armor than can he play with a quarterback who's not elite? And the reason for that is there's nothing you can do about your size. I mean, he can't. I mean, this is who he is now. Devonta Smith, small player, elite production. Deshaun Jackson, small player, elite production in his prime. So this is not a deal breaker. I just don't love it. And if there was something you could change about a guy, I think with him it'd be his size. I don't worry about can he do it without an elite quarterback. I don't want to get into is Cousins elite or not, whatever. We're not going to talk about that. But I mean, Cousins is an upgrade from Kenny Pickett and from Caleb Williams at this stage in each of their careers. Yes. So we don't have to worry about can he do it without an elite quarterback, because he's got the best quarterback he's ever played with is with the Vikings. So I'm good there. Don't love his size. There's ways around that. You can still be productive even if you don't have great size. Plus, there's ways around it. Put him in the slot where he's off the line. He can't get pressed. Motion him, put him in bunches, all sorts of things you can do to get around that. So I'll be curious to see how they deploy Jordan Addison. And then I'm also curious to see, and we alluded to this or mentioned this last week, Gyles, if they use him on special teams at all and in what capacity. I should have prepped this, but I don't know what his punt return or kickoff return numbers were in high school and college, but he looks like a punt returner. When I watch him with the ball in his hands and when I just look at him, he looks like he could return punts. And to me, that's as important as what his stats might be returning punts at Pitt 3 years ago. I mean, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. Does he have the skill set and does he have the intuition to do it? And something tells me he does. Whether they choose to do that with their WR2 or not is up to them, but I think he's got the skill set to do it. So, all things considered, I came away a little underwhelmed from a positional standpoint that they took Jordan Addison. But when I look at the player, and we talk a lot about, especially with quarterbacks, it kind of matters where you go as to whether or not you're going to end up being a good player or not. when I look at where Jordan Addison went, it's a great match. I think him going to the Vikings, he should be as excited about him coming to Minnesota as Minnesota is about, Addison coming to them.
Yep. And I think if you were able to get a repeat, so to speak, with Justin Jefferson in 2023 and his production, I think you could give a decent portion of that success back to Jordan Addison and the idea that they're going to draw coverage away from Justin Jefferson, because I think some teams sold out to stop him, and they stopped him. And we, in some ways, were able to defeat other teams in different ways, and we were able to punish them, but not every time. Like, there was not a ton of answers to when they sold out to stop Justin Jefferson. And I think this is that answer. If they sell out to stop Justin Jefferson, between TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, we should be able to extremely punish other teams. So I think you're going to see less and less teams selling out, so to speak, which means Justin Jefferson might thrive even more.
Okay. You, great point, Gyles. And we're going to move on to the next draft pick, Blackmon. But I mentioned in the buildup, and I had forgotten that I mentioned it until you just said it. But I said we're going to talk about the first two picks of the Vikings draft affecting their offense, because I view Hawkinson as a kind of a part of this draft class, because they used the pick in this class to get him. So, and then when we were talking about KJ Osborne being a 2 for you, you're kind of wanting more. If he's a 3, you're perfect. But really, when you look at it, Hawkinson's their 2. He's their second best threat.
Correct.
So Addison is their 3, and KJ Osborne is their 3B or their 4. And with that setup, I think there's not much more you can ask for, really. I mean, at the end of the day, you got the best or second best wide receiver in the entire league. You got a first round wide receiver that you're building up. You got a top 5, top 3 tight end in the NFL. And then you got KJ Osborne, who, as third and fourth wide receivers go, you can't really ask for much more, so
exactly.
Yeah. So,
we talked a lot this offseason about T. Higgins coming to the Minnesota Vikings, and we were talking about how we were able to achieve a number 1 offense. Yeah. If you can, let's project that Jordan Addison is able to achieve similar levels of success. That's a big if, don't get me wrong, but if, then we're able to do exactly what we suggested without having to overpay for him. So that's a really, really exciting possibility.
Agreed. Yep. Agreed. So, really like where the Vikings are at from a primary pass catching standpoint. I think they're in a good spot. And although you can scratch your head or wonder about, or I guess you could say, you could claim that one is being too presumptive by being excited about a rookie wide receiver helping out this offense, because a guy like Thielen leaves, and it's pretty presumptuous to think that Addison can step in and do what Thielen did. Maybe it is, but also look what Justin Jefferson did as a rookie. And if Jordan Addison is 65% as good as that, you are better this year than you were last year at wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. So
agreed. Full stop.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to not the second round, because that's kind of the Hawkinson pick, but we'll go to the third round, where the Vikings took a corner, Mekhi Blackmon, also out of USC. And with Blackmon, I think you're addressing a position that I was wondering if the Vikings would address in the first round. They wait till the third round to do it, but that doesn't mean that they didn't do it well. I think there's a lot to like about Blackmon. Gyles will get into some of his background and some of his snaps by position and some of his grades, but I think the Vikings do a good job here. We mentioned they need to literally get warm bodies into the cornerback room, because they were running out of people to play with some of the departures. The addition of Byron Murphy is elite. I love that, and they do have a couple of youngsters coming up behind him that they can kind of groom. And now they add another one to the list, to the group here in Blackmon. So not a young guy by any stretch. I believe he's 24 years old. That doesn't bother me so much. Certainly has some good experience and production in college, and comes to a Vikings defense that is thirsty for production and an answer at cornerback. So thoughts here, Gyles, on Mekhi Blackmon?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I know we were talking about him being 24 years old. He actually had his degree in gerontology, which is essentially the study of old age, the process of aging,
there you go.
which is just kind of a funny thing. But at the end of the day, I'm really, really intrigued about this prospect, maybe more than Jordan Addison even, because I look at this guy that should have been a first round talent, in my opinion. He ultimately dropped, and I think that's partially because he encountered injury and we'll call it roadblocks throughout his entire career when it came to high school and college. He ultimately grew up in Hayward, California. He attended Menlo and Atherton High School. He was a 3-star recruit. He was a 23rd ranked cornerback and 45th ranked player out of California in 2019. But at the end of the day, he had some issues going on in high school that I've heard about. I don't know exactly the parameters to it, but at the end of the day, that caused him to drop out of getting offers for college. So essentially, he got a little bit of a late start. So he went to JUCO in San Mateo. In 2017, he played pretty well. They won 11-2. They had the winningest record in program history. They advanced to the state championship, and ultimately that was able to propel him to go to Colorado in 2018 through 2021. So essentially, he was able to put a bunch of work on the field, so to speak, to get him back into more of a neutral footing based on everyone else's age. But he was behind the 8-ball, so to speak, all throughout that time up until 2017. Went to Colorado, performed very, very well. He was a 2021 All Pac-12 honorable mention. And then after that, he transferred to USC in the 2021 season. And then in 2022, this is where he really stepped it up. He achieved a 90.6 grade in 2022 at USC. He was the 2022 third team AP All-American. This guy led all Pac-12 cornerbacks. This guy was phenomenal. He played in the slot, played out wide. This guy was doing pretty well. Already played pretty well at Colorado, but when I, went to USC, lined up directly aside from, on the other side of Jordan Addison. This guy is a baller. He takes his work very, very seriously. You talk to any one of his teammates and his coaches, and this guy is the epitome of success when it comes to effort. This guy is the first person in the building, last one out. This guy really intrigues me, excuse me, so to speak, when he was so far behind the 8-ball and was able to get back up into the third round. This guy fell quite a bit based on his slow act to get back into a good footing. So I'm really, really excited about this prospect.
So as draft picks go, Gyles, in the NFL, Blackmon's the 102nd pick of the draft, third round pick. Generally, even at corner, which is a premium position, generally speaking, you look at first, second, and third round picks as guys that very fair to suggest they can come in and start for you as rookies. Once I think you get out of the top 100, and he's 102, so he's technically out of the top 100. But once you get out of the third round, once you get out of the top 100, once you get out of the third round, you're kind of looking at guys that you are expecting to come in and help you maybe as rookies, but down the road can be starters. So I look at Blackmon, and when I look at it from that perspective, plus us viewing the Vikings cornerback room as being certainly under construction with no surefire starters outside of Murphy, the free agent signing, I expect Blackmon to come in and probably start games as a rookie. And if that doesn't happen, or if he plays poorly as a guy who's just a reserve and backing up and playing occasionally, I would be very disappointed about that. So I think even though a number of corners went before Blackmon, I have a feeling that the Vikings had Blackmon among their top 3, 4, 5 corners in the draft and got him in the third round. That'd be my guess. Just reading between the lines, reading tea leaves, thinking about Brian Flores, thinking about this defense, thinking about Blackmon's background. I think that they kind of had Blackmon as a guy that they would have loved. They said, we'd love to get our hands on this kid. We want him. So that's my sense. And I think he comes in with a great opportunity to contribute early and perhaps be a starter for the Vikings in his rookie season. So I don't have any qualms about his size. 5'11", 178 is what I've seen listed. I think that's good. I'm not a big age guy. I think at a third round pick, you kind of want 2 contracts out of him. And in that case, add 8 years to his age. He's 32. I think if you get two contracts out of a third round pick, you're good.
Mhm.
He'd be 32. I think it's fair to expect a 32-year-old to be coming out of his second contract. And like, that's kind of the stage of his career where he becomes a year-to-year mercenary for teams. So I'm fine with his age. It's not like he's a 26-year-old or something.
Mhm.
So really solid pick. Made me feel a lot better about the Vikings draft in general after they didn't address the position in the
Mhm.
first and couldn't address it in the second. They addressed it in the third. And so this was kind of one of those where even though I mentioned I'm more excited about the last 3 picks than the first 3 picks, if you had me power rank the first 3 picks, I probably would have put this one number 1, Addison number 2, and Ward
Mhm.
number 3. So I'm a fan of this pick. And I think there's a good chance we'll move on now to the safety to Ward, but Gyles, I think there's a good chance that 1 year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be like, wow, Blackmon, 3rd round pick. Wow, that was nice. That was a good find.
Agreed. Because I think he's the perfect combination of talent, like raw talent, effort, and a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He was delayed and not everyone took a chance on him, and he really had to work for it, which among all the positions that you want a chip on the shoulder, corner may be number 1. You want some attitude with your corner, and this guy has it. So I'm really, really excited to see what he can do for us.
Yep. All right, let's go to the 3rd and final pick that we're going to dive deep on today, and that is safety Jay Ward. Safety, we should use that term lightly, I think, Gyles. He may be a player who plays in a lot of different spots. I'm sure you'll get into that with some of your breakdown of him. What's interesting about Jay Ward, aside from him as a player and person and his background, is the connections that he has to the Vikings, right? Having played for Daronte Jones, and having been teammates at USC with a couple of Vikings in Justin Jefferson and Ed Ingram. So we talked about safety as not really being a position we saw the Vikings addressing early, Gyles. We really liked the Vikings safety room coming into the draft. With their versatility, with their youth. Yeah. And Brian Flores and what he might do with it. So a room that we already liked, Gyles, got better with the addition of Jay Ward, and Jay Ward is just more of what they already are. I think nebulous, versatile, undefined, but not wayward or lost. A great combination of that. So a very interesting choice here for the Vikings, a safety, and more proof, I think, perhaps, Gyles, that teams don't let need dictate how they draft, exclusively dictate how they draft. They like to take good players and players that fit. And I think Jay Ward is a player the Vikings looked at and said, this guy fits with who we are as a safety group and as a defense.
Yep, 100%. And I think the sheer fact that Daronte Jones, who is currently the Minnesota Vikings defensive backs coach, was the defensive coordinator at LSU when he was there, I think should show you that we think that we can get a lot out of him. Because to be honest, I look at this player as someone that has tremendously high upside, but maybe wasn't focused as much as maybe he should have. So I think although he has played pretty much everything in the backfield, he's played corner, nickel safety, wide corner. Like, this guy has played it all, and he's all played it at least average, and some carries above average. If you're able to isolate that to a few of them, I think you're going to get even better production out of him. But I think when you think about the versatility, I think the Vikings like that, to be able to produce the illusion of complexity, where if you have these players on the field, the opposing offense doesn't necessarily look at the defense and be able to predict what they're going to do, because any of those players could play any of the positions. So I'm really, really intrigued by what that could be. But this guy, he has quite the football history. He was born in Georgia. He had 2 brothers that ended up playing college football. But at the end of the day, he went to Colquitt County High School. His team went 14-0 his senior season, but then lost in the championship, unfortunately. Did football and track. He's super, super fast. He was a 3-star athlete. He was the 50th ranked cornerback and the 54th best prospect out of Georgia in 2019. When he played at LSU as a freshman, he played in all 13 games as a true freshman during that championship run season. This guy is a special teams guy. I think that's where he'll start out for the Minnesota Vikings. This guy's a stud. In his first 2 years, he blocked kicks. He was doing pretty good. And then in 2021, he was moved from corner to safety, and he started in all 11 games. So I think it's interesting the fact that he was a corner and then moved to safety. That feels a little bit more like positional need for LSU than maybe what was best for Ward. But at the end of the day, he got experience in both. You can maybe make an accusation that he's similar to Cam Bynum in the idea that he knows corner and safety. I'm intrigued to see what Cam Bynum does for our team this year. When you think about the come up for our safety room and what happens to Cam Bynum, I think there's a chance that some of these guys play both positions. If we're sensing a trend here, but at the end of the day, this guy's versatile. He's played in all the defensive backfield. So when I think about the 2023 season, I expect him to start off on special teams and get integrated a little bit play by play, game by game into the safety and cornerback room. But special teams is where I see this guy thriving, at least initially.
Yeah, and Gyles, you mentioning him potentially being a stalwart on special teams early in his career harkens me back, reminds me of, and there's another element here that ties to me Ward to this player. I'm going to compare him to a former Viking.
Okay.
When I look at Jay Ward, there's something about his background that reminds me of Jamarcus Sanford.
Ooh, okay.
When the Vikings selected Jamarcus Sanford, 7th round pick, I believe out of Ole Miss, it was nondescript to me at the time. And he ends up being a great player for the Vikings over a long period of time, and started on special teams, and then was a great contributor, becomes a starter and a very productive player, and quite frankly, a guy that was a tone setter. I would characterize him as a leader, but I wasn't a player in the locker room. I was a staff member around the locker room, so I don't have the qualification to say Jamarcus Sanford was a great leader for the team. The players and coaches would have to tell you that, but he certainly set a tone with his style of play. And so after I had realized all of this, and it became very obvious that Jamarcus Sanford was a key part of the Vikings defense, an important part of the Vikings defense, you kind of look back at like, wow, what a great find by Rick Spielman and this staff. How'd they do it? Well, a stat about Jamarcus Sanford that immediately stood out to me was during his 4 years at Ole Miss, he was the SEC's leading tackler. All right. So we all know the SEC is the best conference in the country. So over a 4-year stretch, don't you think it makes sense that the best tackler in the SEC over a 4-year stretch probably was going to be a good player in the NFL? Right.
Yeah,
probably
good leading indicator.
Right. Okay. So now, like, fast forward, Jamarcus Sanford's a good player for the Vikings. I'm like, man, what a great find. Look back on him. Like, well, duh. Yeah. So now here's the thing that I bring Jay Ward back into this now. And you said it already. He played in 13 games as a true freshman during a national championship season. Like, I don't know how old he was, but I'm guessing he was 18 or 19 as a true freshman. And he's playing for LSU from the SEC, winning a national title, played in all 13 games. I mean,
that cannot go understated.
It can't. Exactly right.
He has a winner mentality.
Well, yeah, and he's got some ability, and obviously he's got some physical traits, and certainly now has experience that he can lean on and should serve him well at the NFL level. So my comp with him is Jamarcus Sanford for an unusual reason, but I think it's one of those where if 3 years from now, Jay Ward is a really good player for the Vikings, you look back at it and you see one of the top bullet points, played 13 games as a true freshman during LSU's national championship season. Well, yeah, duh. Of course he was good in the NFL,
100%. Yeah. And honestly, I think his versatility ultimately ended up harming him in his true draft status and his draft position. Had he been focused in a particular place, I think you maybe would have seen a little bit more progression in certain aspects. Because outside of that, I think this guy was a much higher prospect than where he was drafted. So really excited for this good find.
Yep. And you got to think that Brian Flores and Daronte Jones got together, and Jones was like, this kid I coached at LSU, like, he's not going to go in the first couple rounds. But he's really got some ability. He can do this, and that well. And it'd be great if we could get him. I know we're good at safety, but I think we can do. And Flores turned the tape on and was like, oh, you're right. Yep. Like this. I like that, and the cool thing about when you take guys at this stage of the draft is you know that there are holes in the resume. I mean, that's why they didn't go in the first few rounds. So you know there's stuff wrong. But at this point, you sit around as a staff and you say, what can he do? And those things, can we use those? Do we need those? And can we use those? And they obviously said yes to those with Jay Ward. So again, a player that I think the Vikings probably had on their board and wanted to get their hands on. And I'm not going to say that about every pick. I think that there are just times where you're on the clock, you don't love anyone, you got to take someone, and it happens. And I think that probably happened to the Vikings in this draft. But I think Jay Ward is one where they were kind of like, it'd be cool if we could get this guy. And the board fell, and they were on the clock, and he was there, and they took him.
Yep. And another notion to kind of support that would be Andrew Booth Jr.'s recent press conference. They were asking him how his recovery was going and asked him a bunch of questions about his offseason. And one thing that really stood out to me that he said was the fact that Brian Flores entered the room, or entered the building, so to speak. And one of the first things that he asked all the defensive back players to do was to learn each other's positions. He's like, you are all responsible for knowing each other's positions, where if you're asked to step in, I want you to be fluent in every defensive back position. So at face value, you're like, well, of course, you want to know what the other guy's doing. Like if I'm playing left guard, I want to know right guard, same thing on offense. But if you're looking at defense, if you're reading into that, I really am expecting a little bit more creativity out of Brian Flores based on that comment and other things that have happened this offseason, where I think you're going to see a lot of players doing some unique things.
Yep. I think so too. And I think that that's the way the NFL is going in general, but I think that's especially how Flores is. And I think it's a new school or a new way of thinking as talent evaluators and team builders is it's not just so pigeonholed. Every position is not just so pigeonholed. Like you need this from them, this from that, this from over here. You can be, we've already used the word, but it's nebulous. You can be undefined and you can be sort of gray area. You're not without direction. You're not without vision. That's part of the vision, is to be unpredictable, to be versatile, to be able to change and shift. You still you want to set the tone as an offense and a defense. You want to have an identity and you want to set tone, but you need to be able to adjust and you need to be able to be different based on circumstance and situations. And you might be injured at certain positions, so you got to be able to change your scheme and style of play to compensate for that. You might be playing another team that's got a unique way of attacking, so you need to have a unique way to offset that. So and I think the Vikings safety room is the best example of this identity of not being so set in your way. It's the one way to do it, and then if someone solves that, you're screwed, right? So I think that was sort of a theme of this draft for the Vikings, certainly among the first three picks. So,
And I could not wish for a different person to be able to lead that charge other than Brian Flores, because when you think about being a mad scientist, experimental type room, and the idea that let's try a few different things, let's be nebulous, that can backfire on you too if no one knows what they're supposed to do, that it has great upside, but if you can't get it off the ground, that it ends up flopping. But if I'm going to pick anyone to lead that charge, it's Brian Flores, because at the end of the day, we've said it before, I'll say it again, he's a brilliant teacher and someone that is very driven. So I'm really excited about that combination in terms of what that can actually translate to on the field.
Agreed. All right, so that's going to do it for this breakdown of the Vikings' first three picks of the 2023 NFL Draft. Next week, we will do a similar breakdown of the second three picks, the last three picks the Vikings had in the draft. And if we have a little time left, I think we can get into some of those undrafted free agents too, Gyles. Gyles and I and the rest of the NFL world expect the NFL to release its schedule. Now, word on the street was it would be this Thursday night. However, Peter King, in his weekly column on Monday morning, suggested the schedule may not be ready for Thursday night. Now, when I hear that, I immediately think this is just the NFL PR machine's way of keeping the schedule release in the headlines. Like, hey, might not be ready on Thursday. Talk about that for a little while. Right. And then on Thursday, it's like, oh, we got it ready. Here you go. And now you can, right. And then you spend the next week talking about the schedule. So we'll see what happens. We might need to have an emergency Wobcast 2.0 if the schedule does get released on Thursday. Maybe we can find some time in our schedules to to get an emergency episode out on Friday or Saturday, talk about the Vikings schedule. If not, we'll do a schedule release breakdown in addition to another draft breakdown next week. That sound good to you, Gyles?
Let's do it.
All right. So to listen back to past podcasts, to catch future ones, and to subscribe to this podcast, please go to wherever you find all your other favorite podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can also watch us and listen to us on YouTube. We encourage you to do that and subscribe to us there. You can find me on Twitter at Wobby. Find us on social media, interact with us. Let us know what you think. We love it when fans dictate some of the content. We want to make sure we're talking about what you want to hear about. So on behalf of Gyles, this is Wobby signing off from the Wobcast for now, but we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, Skol Vikings.